All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in on this Thursday morning right before the All-Star break. Feels like a lot of people are starting to slowly tune out. I think we're going to have like a week off from games. So thank you, everyone who supported me the past few weeks. I've been doing a lot more of these streams. I like this format a lot more. Been getting a lot of good feedback. Made covering the trade deadline a lot more fun, and I'll probably keep doing this format periodically over the next few months, and then I'll probably ramp things up even more as we get closer into the playoffs, the lead up to the draft, offseason, and I'm sure I'll find more ways to improve it. Probably get guests along eventually. So if you haven't seen my stuff before, if you're watching this on Twitter, make sure to subscribe to me on YouTube where you can get notifications when I'm going to go live. If you're watching on YouTube, follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. I've got a lot of good posts about NBA transactions as they happen, good salary cap reactions to them, and make sure you're subscribed to Third Apron, my newsletter on Substack. Been pretty active on there. Just had a post on Monday that I updated throughout the week. I added some more thoughts on winners and losers on teams. Anyone could check that one out. That one's unlocked. Anyone can read it. And I just released today something I do after every trade deadline. And when I was with Hoops Hype, I just look at a couple players who we could see their names mentioned in the next transaction cycle. Players that we can see get just hearing about potentially getting moved. As the image suggests, I talk about the cover of the article. It features Kevin Durant, LaMelo Ball. So just a couple players, but I list 10 of them. You can read through them. And just kind of feels like this trade deadline set the groundwork for what could be even more big moves in the offseason. Whatever we've heard now, like the Kevin Durant stuff that didn't come to fruition, I'm sure that would get revisited in the offseason. So I want to talk about a couple teams now that the dust has settled. We've gotten to see a lot more, gotten to like really soak everything in. I feel like the Lakers stuff was just especially so much. It was really hard to digest everything so much, so fast, just too shocking. Even after the trade deadline, the whole rescindment, which I never even got into, I'm going to touch on that a little bit. So I'm going to pull their situation up. But overall, I think that it's for the best for the Lakers. I said on trade deadline day that when the trade actually it was announced, I thought it was an overpay for the Lakers. I think they gave up too much. And now they keep their picks for later. They can do something else in the offseason. They can also have a little bit more they can trade. Mostly they can now package their 2032 swap, or they could trade that pick instead if a team's more interested in that. But, to have their optimal package, since they already are out on the odd numbered picks, they're 25, they're 27, they're 29, they can trade more theoretically if they trade their 31, and then the swaps on the even number years. I do feel like this trade will probably get revisited in some capacity. And we kind of got an idea now what the Lakers are looking for. They're looking for a lob threat. They're looking for someone else who's a little younger. And I'll look around, see what some other players that can potentially be. But I think at the very least, this will get revisited. I do think the Lakers did have genuine interest in getting Mark Williams. A lot of interesting quotes on what they feel about him. They think he could be a lot better, but maybe it's the sort of thing where now they're going to want the Hornets to take a little less. I don't know what that means. If it means one less swap, or maybe some protections on the pick, or maybe they don't want him at all. But I would guess that like maybe there is going to be a little bit of revisiting. But when I look around and see who else they could pursue, one name, and I was talking to For the Wins, Brian Kalbrowski. He brought up, like, if they're looking for another type of player like that who's on the younger side and still cheap right now, he brought up like a Jalen Duren type, because that's the only other type of guy I could maybe see the Lakers pursuing, or we didn't see Mark Williams being available. How do the Pistons feel about a guy like him, where he's definitely shown a lot of flashes to be a really great center, but minutes have been extremely inconsistent. He's about to be also could do for an extension. Lakers can easily acquire a guy like him with the same similar type package. So we'll get into what they can do next. That's what I want to talk about. As far as the rescindment, though, I do feel like there needs to be a little bit more clarity on the process. Just because, and I'm not saying the Lakers did this, but what's technically stopping a team from making a trade for a player that they already have an idea might have some injury issues coming up, just to bring him in the door, give him a physical so they could really get an up close look. So and maybe the Hornets are a little upset that the Lakers didn't like really do this trade in the spirit of actually wanting to do the trade. Maybe they just want to take a closer look at him, in which case, if that is if that is something that happened, I think that needs to be cleaned up. I'm not saying that's what the Lakers did, but I do think that's something that probably should be prevented. So if there is a little more clarity on the process, maybe there's a little more to prevent teams from just doing that kind of thing. I think that would make some sense. So as far as the Lakers now, though, I still feel like this team is pretty good. I think that they could definitely make a run to the conference finals. They feel like Knicks East to me, where this is definitely a top offense, if not number one, definitely top three. And I don't think the defense should be that bad. The rebounding is going to be the biggest concern, but they've been below average defense. I understand the concern going from Anthony Davis to no other all defense type players could knock it down a little bit, but they still have some pretty smart defenders. In that first Lakers game, Lakers really went all in on the small ball, and I know it's the Jazz, but I do think that they shouldn't be too terrible. I think they can make it work on defensively. So I think they're still pretty good. I wouldn't expect Alex Len to have like a big role or anything. I think if anything, he's just a healthier body than Christian Wood, who hasn't played all year. And after signing him, they could still do another two-way. They could do another signing, another two-way conversion. Like they can still cut somebody else right now, and still sign someone else today, and then even have some room towards like the last week of the season to do another signing if they want to bring someone else in. So at this point, though, I would guess that if they're going to pursue another big man, they wouldn't even pursue anyone. They would just convert one of their two-way guys, either Trey Jemison or Christian Koloko. Lakers could only really give them a 2-year minimum, like rest of season, maybe team option on the second year if they want to try to re-sign him to a longer deal after that. But that's basically the options. But I'm not too worried. I think they're in a better spot. I think they're okay. I'm skeptical about their chances against like Denver and OKC, but just considering this was a mid-season trade, I think they're in a pretty fine spot. But I do want to take a look at what they could do next, because this is something that I've already mentioned. This is something I've already talked about plenty of times while talking about the Lakers since the Doncic trade. But the LeBron factor, what is he going to want to do as far as potentially taking a pay cut like he considered last offseason? But I don't think it's quite as necessary as last season after doing the Luka trade. So right now, their situation is that heading into the offseason, they're going to be already having a pretty big payroll. They're going to be at the tax. And as far as the apron stuff, they don't have to figure out where they are. Like if they want to be a below apron team or above apron team, they don't really know that until the season actually happens, until we get into the offseason. And they've got the 2-player options for LeBron and Dorian Finney-Smith. Dorian Finney-Smith actually became extension eligible yesterday, but I think he's gonna take it to free agency and sign try to get the longest deal he could then. But just keep in mind, he could extend right now. I would figure his salary is probably something around what he's currently making on average. But then what is LeBron going to want to do? Is he going to want to take a little bit less to help things out? And I'm going to go over why it's not quite as necessary anymore. And the biggest thing is if they're going to end up doing that type of trade again, where they get a Mark Williams type of center who's pretty inexpensive now, then you don't really need to do too much else, because I think the rosters, I think it's pretty fine. They have mostly everyone coming back. So I want to talk about a guy like, let's say they got to go a little more expensive, but they still want to get a little bit on the younger side. So I'll bring up Nick Claxton, who's a guy who I don't know if that Mark Williams package will be enough, but it's kind of like everything else the Lakers have to offer. And I bring up him up because of his salary range, where he's making about $25 million. So Lakers, if they're going to still be paying LeBron the max, and Dorian Finney-Smith's going to be making whatever he's going to be making, so I'll just keep them on their player options. They're going to be above the apron level, the first one. So they're going to have to send out more money than they're taking back. So they're going to be in a very similar situation as they are, and that's fine. So they can get there with expirings like Kleba and Gabe Vincent and Shake Milton, who's got that non-guaranteed salary. And then you got to throw in one more minimum salary. One thing the Lakers could do is look at the Knicks playbook for this type of salary matching, where they don't technically need to send out only players that's under contract to make the salaries match, but they can also do the trick where they send out players that they're their own free agents that they have some form of bird rights to. So maybe they can do that with whoever is expiring, Alex Len, Markieff Morris. You sign them to like those 3-year non-guaranteed deals just to help get them that extra money up there. So that's just something the Lakers could do. And then technically it would let them increase their payroll if they want to really maximize their spending, because ideally they're going to just want to stay below the second apron. And under this type of framework, if they're only getting off the expirings of Kleba and Vincent for a center like a Nick Claxton, then they still have some room to do a couple other things. They can give LeBron actually a little bit more money. They can give Dorian Smith a little bit more money. Maybe they can even use their tax pyramid level, which I even plugged that in already. Maybe get another big man. So I feel like for the most part, they're pretty fine. Like this trade really completely flipped their outlook, and I think they have already like a good roster to sustain all this. They just got to figure out the big man, which I don't think is going to be much of a problem. You have everything else checked. But then I want to look at what if LeBron does take somewhat of a pay cut, and I don't think it's going to be anything too, like at the highest end, it wouldn't be anything too significant. Last year, there was speculation maybe he'd give back like $20 million, something like that. So let's say he actually does that, and they go again after a guy like Nick Claxton. So here I have him getting roughly $35 million, and that's roughly 17 off whatever his player option is. Now you can open up a lot more things. Two things mainly. One, you can use the full mid-level. So I have them using just like not the whole thing. The whole thing is $14 million, and I just say not the whole thing because last offseason, I don't think any player other than, I think just the Anthony Melton got the whole thing, but that's just for 1 year. No one really got like the full amount and the full years. So, and just seeing how weak this free agency class is, I would guess they wouldn't even have to use the whole thing to get someone. So that's number one. And if they do that, then they're hard capped to the first apron. So they're going to have a cheaper roster, which, okay, like that's not really important, but they have more flexibility to do a couple better things. Mainly that now the trading for a guy like Nick Claxton is a little easier. Instead of having to reach his $25 million salary, now all you got to do is get within it by like $8.5 million, something like that. In which case you can just do the expirings of Vincent and Kleba, and then you can keep like Shake's salary, do something else with him. So overall, they still have their deep roster. They figure out their big man situation, and they just have a little bit more optionality for the rest of the season to do trades. They have those they have those expanded trade exceptions they can use to do more stuff. So I'm pretty excited to see what they end up doing this offseason. I think that they already, like, the they've already done a lot of their stuff. Mainly that bringing Dorian Finney-Smith makes a lot of sense. They've needed more wing depth. Keeping Rui Hachimura, who seemed like a player a lot of people thought might get traded, I think that's really important now. And yeah, just between their top six, this is just a great rotation. Just plug in a starting quality big man, and they're going to be in a good spot. All right, so I want to get into Cleveland, a team I didn't really get into that much at all. Very fascinating situation now, having done this trade. So they bring in DeAndre Hunter, who I feel like is just as good as the type of wing they needed to bring to this team. Not that there maybe could have been better options, but I think they just needed like a fourth, fifth option, and he's like as good as you can get there offensively. And there's like a good and bad, not so bad, but like they're financially, like it's good this year. They're going to duck the tax. This roster's pretty set. They just got to sign one more guy. This could be enough to just help push them through the final, to push them to make it through the end of the Eastern Conference. But now they're going to have a very expensive team next year. And this was something I discussed about the Cavs when I talked about, okay, what if they can get a guy like Cam Johnson, and who makes a similar amount of money, and now they end up doing it with DeAndre Hunter. So it's a big investment. Because now instead of having just George Niang's $8.5 million, they're having DeAndre Hunter's $23 million. So they run up their payroll significantly, and they're already going to be well above the luxury tax while they still need to fill out the roster and right at the second apron. Now, that's not all. So here is just like a more realistic breakdown of their payroll and how expensive it's going to be right now. So here is what the Cavs is projected right now. If they fill up the roster and Evan Mobley just gets a 25% max, which I don't actually think this is what he's going to be getting. I think he's going to get more. I think he's probably going to get All-NBA at this point. If he gets a third-team All-NBA, then he gets the 27% max, in which case he would get like an extra $3 million next year. So right now they're looking at a $300 million roster. Evan Mobley gets third-team All-NBA. It gets boosted up to this. Now their payroll, their tax, everything just went up like $20 million total. That's not all. Let's say he gets first or second team All-NBA, which second team I think might be possible. He gets the 30% max. Same amount of money as Donovan Mitchell, gets the same contract as him essentially. So now the payroll increased by like $50 million. Everything increased by $50 million total. I don't know if you guys are aware, going like worldwide going on, big wealth disparity. Billionaires are getting a lot richer. I remember post-COVID, the Cavs owner specifically got a huge infusion of wealth. Not good for us generally as people, but probably pretty good if you're a Cavs fan, because they've had a history of paying deep in the tax. In those LeBron years, they've paid really deep in the tax. It wasn't quite this level, but I don't think this wouldn't surprise me. I would guess that if this team makes a deep playoff run, they're going to be willing to spend whatever it takes to sustain all this. And the DeAndre Hunter trade alone was just like the biggest tell. If they're willing to increase their payroll like this, knowing that Mobley is very much looking at getting a much higher salary going forward than he was when he signed that contract, I think they're prepared to spend a lot of money, even if they don't make a deep run this year. But I think there will be a lot of pressure just knowing this financial, all these expenses coming up. That probably brings a lot more pressure to justify the spending. But that does bring a couple other questions, mainly who from their bench are they going to try to retain this year? Who are they going to prioritize? Because if you look at this, who do we have? Strus making about 16 mil, Okoro making 11, Dean Wade making 6.6. So these are the three guys in their rotation so far that are under contract for this year. That's not counting Ty Jerome, who has been incredible this year. He's going to have early bird rights. Cavs they'll be able to re-sign him. They have they'll have enough rights to re-sign him on whatever the market will command from him, will want to give him. Because the early bird rights let him starts at like $14 million. I don't think he's going to get quite that much, but just so you get an idea, he can get that much. And I think that's their only other significant free agent. And if they re-sign him, then we might be talking about their luxury tax penalty being almost equal as their payroll. So I'm skeptical it would get to that the Cavs right now would be comfortable going that deep. In which case, what is there anyone on the bench they'd consider potentially moving to make room for Ty Jerome, or even just to soften this penalty coming up? I don't think it'd be Strus. I think he's going to be awesome coming off the bench. He's still been pretty good this year. I think like for a 6-man, that's as good as you can get. But maybe Okoro, who's been having a down year, lots of injuries. Obviously, a lot about his future will be known over the next coming months. See how he does in this. Now he wasn't really like in the rotation as much, but now that they consolidated a little bit, going from LeVert and Niang to Hunter, that's one less rotation player. So Okoro is going to be a little more dependent on. So we'll see how he does, but he's got 2 years, about $22 million left on his deal, which isn't impossible to move. But I would just keep an eye now that Hunter is in, especially, and he's going to be the starter. Maybe they look to move Okoro, especially if they are pretty intent on bringing back Ty Jerome. In which case, okay, you can probably just substitute Okoro's salary slot with him. And I'm sure, bringing in DeAndre Hunter probably has a little bit to do with Ty Jerome's future. They were both teammates at Virginia. So they got a very fascinating offseason ahead of them. I just don't think it's been talked about enough how expensive this team is going to be. But I would be, just knowing their history of spending, I would be surprised if they tried to, quote unquote, cheap out or anything like that. So that's where they're left now. Just how do they figure out how Ty Jerome factors in, which isn't as easy as you can see as you might think as simply resigning him. All right. Once again, if you guys are tuning in, I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. If you're watching this on YouTube, follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky. If you're watching this on Twitter, make sure you subscribe to me on YouTube. It's my name. And check out Third Apron, my newsletter. A lot of good salary cap stuff, a little more deep stuff than what I've got. Usually talking about fake trades, theoretical movement on this channel. So another trade I haven't really touched on at all on the channel is the Brandon Ingram trade, and in particular the Raptors side of things. I mean, even the Pelicans, there's really not much more to add. The Pelicans, they basically they needed to just get off him because they weren't going to be able to probably keep him, and the rest of their payroll, they're already really expensive, and it was just going to probably be too much of a headache to re-sign him and then try to find a trade later for him, knowing that teams are probably, they know they're going to need to save money. So that kind of changes the dynamic of the negotiation. But the Raptors, they traded for Ingram in a deal which I've written about this week on my winners and losers. I put the Raptors as losers. And the main thing is, so I like the Ingram trade in a vacuum where they only gave up one first-round pick to get him. If you're just thinking about like what they gave up to get a player as talented as him, yeah, that is a pretty low price. And I think most teams would, probably do that. However, the other thing complicating the factor of Brandon Ingram is his contract situation, which got resolved. He got a 3-year, $120 million deal. and there's going to be a player option on that last year. So let me show you though, like, I want to just describe what they've done over the past year and a half, which is this retool they did where they went from the Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam era, and they transitioned now into this general core. It's pretty quick turnaround as far as just changing this team, and seems like that's it. It's done. They're ready to compete. So when you look at their payroll, they did a pretty good job just kind of just making sure everything fits under the tax, which the only time they paid the tax is when they won a championship. So most efficient taxpayer in NBA history. But here is a hypothetical look at their roster had they kept everybody with their current salaries with their new teams, just to show like why they had to get away from this. Because if you have Pascal Siakam making his max, you have Fred VanVleet getting that 2-year max deal with the Rockets. Here's OG's first year with the Knicks. You accompany that with Pirtle's salary, Boucher, Barnes, Grady Dick. I just keep these 7 players because these 3 in particular would probably still be with the Raptors. They wouldn't have been able to get Ochai Agbaji or the pick to get Jacoby Walters. Have they done everything? So, like, knowing that this could have been their top 7 guys, had they not done anything, like, this roster is just too expensive, and they are looking at being like right at the tax already. So this roster was just unsustainable. So what I like what the Raptors did was how they basically redistributed the money to get players that, okay, might not be quite as good, but a little more cost effective. So they obviously they didn't get anything for Fred VanVleet. He left. But then they turned what would be OG Anunoby's big contract into Emmanuel Quickley's, who's making about $32 million. And they also distributed into RJ Barrett. So you get 2, they're not cheap players by any means, but a little more team-friendlier deals. So instead of paying OG and Fred what they're making, they're paying those 2 guys. And then they essentially flip the Siakam return, which was mainly expirings and draft picks. They trade the 1 remaining draft pick they have owed from the Pacers to get Ingram, who now they locked in to that deal. He's going to be making like around $6-7 million less a year than Siakam. So the thing is, like, the Raptors, so that's kind of what they did, and they didn't have their pick last year, so they didn't even have they didn't really like do anything as far as like rebuilding or changing up the core. They just kind of switched things up. They just redistributed the money, and they're going to have 1 selection coming up in this year's draft. It'll probably be, right now I have it projected to be the 7th overall pick. So this is what I've got in their estimate. Maybe it'll be a little lower. I'm guessing they're going to be trying to make a push towards a play-in this year. So when you look at this roster now, though, I've got Ingram's first-year extension in. This is a pretty expensive top 5, and that's before talking about their selection, which will probably be that's not a low salary to pay. They've got Agbaji, they have Dick, they have Walter. They already have the roster more or less set heading in the next year, but that they're right at the tax. That's it. Like, this is already like a pretty, this roster is already like pretty deep for a team that hasn't proven anything, that doesn't seem to on the surface be like more than a team fighting for a play-in spot. If things break even, okay, maybe they make the playoffs. Maybe they can win a first-round series. I have mentioned I don't really like the fit now of the starting 5, but we'll see what happens. I think now it's going to be very TBA. They're going to use the rest of the season to see how things look. Here's how it looks like when they fill out the roster. They still have a 2nd-round pick. Once they get the 14 players, which minimum, they're going to exceed the tax. So on one hand, you would think, okay, there's no way they're going to keep this roster together next season. I wouldn't go that far. I would guess that, okay, there probably will be some changes in the future, but doesn't necessarily need to be next season, because if they go into the season with this roster, they could easily stay under the tax. It's really not that, they're like one trade away from doing that. But I think the bigger issue is, you got Agbaji. He's going to be extension eligible this offseason. If you're going to keep this top five, how are you going to fit Agbaji probably making a lot more than this? And this is even before them getting a backup center. So Chris Boucher is their most significant free agent. Based on the way he's playing, maybe he earns around the same amount he's making. So how do they factor that in? If I would guess they're not going to be able to keep him this year. What are they going to do at backup center? And I've seen already, and this is something I actually wrote about on Third Apron, on my 10 players I could see potentially becoming just players that we hear about but getting moved and rumors ahead of this offseason. Scotty Barnes is untouchable. I don't think Brandon Ingram's really going anywhere, considering they just brought him, the investment they made in him, that he also is, as weird as the fit is, he is their best scorer. They could actually use that element, which kind of makes me feel like maybe RJ Barrett is the odd man out in the future. And I've seen some other people discuss this, people that cover the Raptors, like, well, where does this leave RJ Barrett? And yeah, that kind of seems to be like the more expendable player of the bunch. And I feel like with the way Ochai Agbaji's his trajectory is going, maybe they can make their backcourt work, primarily with him, Andick, and Walter, as they develop. I think between these guys and Ingram and Barnes, like, you can make a pretty formidable wing rotation. In which case, what do you do with RJ? Are you just looking to dump him and get some draft picks back to save money? Or, I think a little more realistically, maybe they look for an upgrade at center. Just seeing how they're valuing players more and more. Players that can help them now. I could see that being a more realistic route for what they end up doing with RJ Barrett if they decide to trade him. But we'll see what happens. I really wouldn't be surprised if they run this team back next season, this core back next season, even like, and just drag it through the trade deadline. This team tends to hold on to players longer than they probably should. And when they like someone, they like to hold on to them. But overall, I'm just not really thrilled with this group. I feel like, again, they could surpass a lot of the initial expectations, but it just seems like at best a first round exit. I think it demands a lot of Scotty Barnes to be that a top 15-ish player, which he hasn't done yet. Can definitely happen. I think it probably will happen from time to time, but I wouldn't expect it like on a consistent year-to-year basis. Like, I think that's really the way this team can really make some noise. But overall, if this is the end of the retool, which seems like it is, I'm just kind of a little underwhelmed where they're only going to have one shot at getting a high selection. And look at this. Look what the Raptors have done. They've selected Siakam at the end of the first round. They've selected OG Anunoby at the end of the first round. They found Fred VanVleet out of nowhere. He was undrafted. And then so they've shown us that they can select really good players anywhere in the draft. And then the one time they get a chance to select with a top selection, they get Scotty Barnes, which is an unbelievable selection. I just wish, they're going to have more opportunities like this. I wish they had at least one more to see who else they could have brought to this group, because I think they probably would have crushed that selection too. We'll see what this ends up being. I get the feeling that if they are going to make the play, which I think is pretty realistic, honestly, Like I could see them passing the Sixers, the Bulls. I think they're behind them now, but if they're fully healthy, I would probably think this Raptors team is better than them, just based on how those teams are playing. In which case, it's going to be a lower selection, which they'll probably still do a good job with it. Maybe they also address their backup, their big man situation with it, draft a center with it. Then they don't have to worry about re-signing Boucher or getting another center. Okay. And then the last team I want to talk about are the Bucks. I really did not get into them at all. I thought it was just like a very bizarre trade. That was my initial take on it. One of those trades where it leaked and when it came out, I really couldn't believe it. Mainly because a lot of Bucks trades that happen are out of the blue. So this was the rare one where it was being rumored and then it actually happened. So their big move, they trade Chris Middleton, longtime Buck since 2013. So just about 12 years. Arrived at the same time with Giannis for Kyle Kuzma. And I just hate it. I hate the fit. Even with Chris Middleton playing on like one leg, he's been better than Kuzma this year offensively. And I understand that a big part of this is that the Bucks probably were trying to get ahead of another injury that can get in the middle of a playoff run. But I just don't think Kuzma was the guy to go for. And the more time goes on, I'm processing the trade and really trying to understand this. It just feels a lot more financially motivated than anything. So a couple of things, and just like even to more, justify that point, reinforce that point. Kuzma had this really big trade bonus worth $7.5 million, which would have been divided between this season and the next two. He ended up only taking $1 million from that. So he gets like an extra, like a third of a million, $333K over the next 3 years added. So instead of making like $27 million, I think that trade bonus would have brought him up to, now he's like 24.5. So the Bucks just went from paying Middleton $31 million to Kuzma $24. And then they also went from Marjan Beauchamp to Kevin Porter. Kevin Porter makes just like a little less. And they got Jericho Sims. Either way, so number one, it's financially motivated. They save a lot of money this year. They were all the moves they made. Also, they no longer had to take Patrick Baldwin Jr. He got rerouted to the Spurs, so they clear a roster spot. They saved like $50 million up front this year. So that's number one. Now, at the same time, I'm not criticizing like necessarily this component. I think that it made sense to save money this year. They wanted to, I think it makes sense to get below the second apron. They were above it. Now they don't have their 2032 draft pick frozen. They also open up their taxpayer mid-level. So they do have enough space to use some of it if they need to pay up for somebody that they like. But keep in mind, they can't sign anyone who was making the mid-level or more. So it's fine as far as this year goes. But then when you look at next year, that's when I'm starting to get a little bit more concerns. So now they're going to be going into next year. They already have Giannis and Lillard. They're going to be making their max salaries about $54 million each. Kuzma's on that descending contract. So it's going to go down next year, and then it's going to go down again one more year. And they've got the pending player options for Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, Kevin Porter Jr. They've got their two most significant free agents are Brook Lopez and Jericho Sims and Taurean Prince, but I don't think re-signing him will be that big of an issue. Curious mostly what those two guys are going to be getting. And they are going to be about $23 million below the projected tax line. And they are now in a position where they potentially might be able to just avoid the tax entirely next year. which is pretty impressive on one hand that they are going to be able to accomplish that with two players making over 50 million, making the 35% max, and then still have somewhat of a formidable top six, assuming they bring back Brook Lopez. But then you're going to be looking at like more than half the roster making like minimum salaries, which is kind of what the build they've been going for the past few years. So here's a projection I made where let's say they get Brook Lopez back, something like 15 million next year. I could be off on that, but I figure he's going to be earning less than what he's been making now. He'll be entering his 17th or 18th season next year. So he's getting up there. Now they have, they could potentially, duck the tax with all that because Kuzma's salary is going down. And while having Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton stick around, I would guess Pat picks up his player option, and I would guess that maybe they extend Bobby Portis. It could be a situation where they get him to maybe take a little bit less on the first year in exchange for giving him multiple guaranteed future years. That's something they actually did with Pat Connaughton on his deal. And yeah, look at that. They're and this is like, it just feels like kind of financially motivated more than anything, where now they're going to potentially duck the tax next year, which I understand they've been spending like 250 million over the past 5 years on luxury tax, which is a lot. So understand if they want to just get a break on that. But if you had now by going from Middleton to Kuzma, I think they make it a little tougher to do something else a little later. Not that Middleton had a lot of trade value, but you're going from that 32 to 22 could make trade opportunities a little more difficult. Now at the same time, because they created so much more flexibility, they don't have to go dollar for dollar anymore. They could do something where maybe they package Kuzma and maybe one of Portis or Connaughton in the future with whatever draft pick they have. They don't even need to meet, like, let's say they want to get a $30 million player. They could just do Kuzma for that guy straight up. They get over the tax, but they still stay below the first apron, which is the only restriction they'd have by doing that type of trade. So I don't know. I guess I'm not so worried about what the payroll situation is, because they could still do more stuff after, but I'm just kind of worried that this trade was mainly financially motivated, because I just don't think Kuzma is a good fit with them. I get the feeling they might be worse now heading into the playoffs. It just feels like they could be first round exit yet again. Bucks have been out of the first round now 23, 24, 20, and then maybe this would be a third year in a row if they miss it, if they lose in the first round. So that's everything I wanted to get into, just a little more deeper thoughts on these four teams. Just things I've been thinking about in my head and been wanting to discuss what's next for these specific teams. So thanks for tuning in. I will probably do something again next week, maybe earlier, on a couple other teams. I'm just kind of thinking about what's next. As we get closer to the offseason, as teams get eliminated, I'll probably do even more deeper dives on the specific team. Kind of like the videos I did last offseason, where I even go over scenarios I could see these teams doing. Make sure you follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky, YouTube, and subscribe to Third Apron.